Hi, I'm Sean Hafer, and this video we will be looking at the basic interface and viewport navigation in Cinema 4D. So when you open Cinema 4D, we're presented with this general default view, and this is the standard layout. So there are other layouts you can go to, but for these videos, we'll stay in the standard. If we start looking at the interface, we can see up here we've got our first icon is the asset browser. This allows us to look at all kinds of different models, 3D models, and materials that we can get to and download from Maxon's website or from their server. I'll close that. These next three are how we can lock movement and rotation and scale along axes if we want to, and that we'll cover later. Over here, we've got our selection tools of what we can select. By default, we're in the model selection tool. Here's our polygons, edges, and points, and we can move those. And you can see as I change these different selections, the tools we can use change on this far side as well. And this is our basic sort of toolbar over here. So I'll go back to model. So next we've got our axis tool, we've got snapping, we've got our work plane, we've got symmetry and some other options we'll get into later. These three over here are very important, and they are our render tools and render settings. So when you're in 3D space and we are setting something up, so for example, let's click on this little cube icon and we'll add a cube object. Now we can see this cube has an axis, and that axis is along our X, Y, and Z coordinate system. And Cinema 4D is what's called a Y-up coordinate system. So we can see that our axis that's going up and down is Y. And we can tell that because of this little icon over here. So that's Y is up and down. Z is forward and back, so away from us and towards us. And X is side to side, so left to right. Now, if we are in our Move tool and on our Object tool, when we've got our cube up here selected, we can kind of just move this around along these axes by just clicking on the axis. If we just click on the object, we can kind of just move it anywhere we want. So I'm going to do undo, which is Command or Control Z a couple times until I get back to my center point here. There we go. When we're in this view, if we want to render our scene, basically what that's doing is it's going to take all of the lighting and materials, so if things are shiny or transparent or reflective, and it's going to calculate all those for our final image. Now, if we click this first icon, which is the render viewport, and the shortcut for that is Command or Control R, that'll render our scene just as it is. So we don't have the grid anymore, we don't have the axes or anything like that, and we just see we're in a black void, and there's our cube with a little bit of shading. By default, we have our default camera, and that is kind of our point of view, how we see around the scene. And also we have a default light, which is also at the place where this default camera is. So at this point, I've not added any lights or any cameras, but this is just how we can initially see. So it's a kind of a simple shading setup. Now, if I go to the next, this is render to picture viewer. Now you can see when I click that, it now renders out into this separate window. And the advantage here is that we can do some different things. We could get in and kind of add some filters like saturation, brightness, contrast, kind of like a little baby Photoshop. We can see our history of different things we've rendered, and we can also save an image out of here. So if I went to File and I save image as, you can see I can say I want to save a still image. Maybe I want it to be a Photoshop document or a PNG. Down here's our color depth. And like with a PNG, it supports up to 16 bits. And Cinema 4D renders in 32 bits. So if you have a format like PSD, Photoshop, that'll support 32 bits, you could save out basically it's like a camera raw image that you could really edit and fine tune if you wanted to. And then you can, so on here, you hit OK, say where you want to save it, and it'll save that image out for you. And I'm just going to close this here. The last one is our render settings, and we'll get into this all throughout the other tutorials, but for this one, we can see this very first option is our renderer. And there are different render engines. which are just different ways that they calculate the light and shadow and reflection and all of that of a scene. The default is Redshift. And Redshift relies on your graphics card or your GPU to speed up its rendering. Now, if you don't have a very good GPU, you might want to switch back into something like standard or physical, which is more reliant on your processor or your CPU. But in these tutorials, we're going to use Redshift. Now, also below here, we'll see we've got our output. This is the size we want to render out. So mine's at 1280 by 720. If I came in here and did my 1920, you can see if I hit tab, it'll go to 1080. So that's my HD. You can set your resolution of how many DPI you want or pixels per inch. So if you know you're going to print this, you could set it at 300 DPI and be good to go. And there's some other options that we'll get to from here. Save is if you want to have it just preset to save your image. You can set all that up. Then when you hit render to picture view, it'll automatically save it without you having to take that extra step. I'll close that. This next little icon here is our material manager. If we click on that, this slides out. And you can see here I've got a little material that was already in there. And to create a new material, you can just double click. And the materials do depend on the render engine. So if you're in the Redshift render engine, by default, when you double click, it'll give you a Redshift material. If you were in the standard, it would give you a standard material. So you don't really have to worry too much about that. So I'm going to close that up. And now over here is our object manager. So we created this cube, and you can see that shows up in our object manager. Anything we have in our scene will be listed over here. If I click on the cube, you can see it gives this little outline around it. If I click off, we've got nothing here. So click it, it turns orange, and we can see our cube has an orange outline. Also, you'll notice down here in the attribute manager that when I click off of it, we have nothing because we're just clicked an empty space. But when I click on that, now it comes up the cube object, and we've got all of these different options. Now, primitives by default are what's called parametric, which means they're being calculated based on math. And you can also have polygonal objects as well as NURBS objects. And we'll get into that in the next video or two. But for now, we're just going to leave it parametric. And we can see we have options down here that we could change. So if I came here and clicked and dragged, we could change that X dimension, right? Bring that up. So I'm going to undo, Command or Control Z. And now let's just kind of look about how we would move around this object. So these four little icons up here are pretty important for that. If I click on the first one, this is my move camera. Now again, we're not moving the object. The object is still in its 0, 0, 0 position, but we are just going to kind of move back and forth around it. Now our next one is our scale camera. So we're moving forward and away. Again, I'm just left clicking and dragging. You can also use your middle mouse button to do that as well. And this one here is our orbit, or rotate around your object. So what you have selected is what you'll orbit around. If I want to go back to where it was, say I've been moving my camera around and everything's really crazy and I'm not sure what's going on, I can always come up here to my view and go to frame default, and it'll take us right back to where we were. We can also, I'm just zooming out way here, if you hit the O key with your object selected, so I'll select my cube, it'll pop it to the center. To change the name of an object as well, you can just double click it. Maybe we'll call it box 1. Okay. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit just using my mouse. Now we can also use some shortcuts with this. Probably in the initial tutorials, I'll be using these just to slow myself down, but also as you're getting used to the interface. So also we can hold down 1 and use our left mouse button and drag it, your camera, move your camera around your object there or along your object. If we hold down 2 and use that left mouse button, we're doing our zoom. And if we hold down 3, you probably guessed it, we're going to do our orbit. So we can orbit around our object. So you can use the icons, you can use the 1, 2, and 3 with a left drag. And a final option, not to make a joke, but if you hold down Option or Alt and you use your left mouse button, you'll orbit. If you use your middle mouse button, you will kind of dolly back and forth. And if you use your right mouse button, you'll zoom. So again, those are all kind of there. I'm going to hit my O to bring my object kind of to the center and kind of get that there. So those are all the options you can use to navigate your scene. We didn't talk about this down here, but what this is, if you click on this icon, this is our coordinates manager, and this will tell us where our objects are. So if I move this up here on the X, you can see I moved it -360. If I type 0 in there and hit enter, it'll pat back to our 0, 0, 0 on our XYZ. And this is our timeline down here. And basically what that's doing is when we get into animation, that'll allow us to set keyframes, move forward and back in time, etc. These here were kind of our tools. And then over here, we've got our sort of objects and modifiers and generators that we'll use for different things throughout different tutorials. One last big important viewport navigation tool. Currently, we can see up here we're in the perspective view. So we're seeing this as a 3D view, and things will be, if I sort of, maybe I'll stretch this out, we can see we get a perspective distortion, right? So we see things as we would see them in real life. This is kind of going back to a vanishing point. I'm going to hit undo there. And if I come up here to this last icon, if I click that, we'll go into a 4-way view. So our perspective is up here at the top left. Over here, we've got our top view. Below is the front view, and here's the right view. And what those are our orthogonal views. So they won't show distortion. They will always be true to the scale and position of our objects. And we can move things along that same way. If we're in our move tool, we can click on an axis and move stuff. And you can see it will respond in each view. And you can see here up in these corners now, we'll see this is basically, we're seeing the Z and X axis. Here we're seeing the Y and X axis. And here we're seeing the Y and Z axis. If you want to go back to, say, your perspective view, come up to this window, click on that icon again, and we'll jump back to the perspective view. You can also use your middle mouse button. So if you just click that, we'll jump to our 4-way view. And if I wanted to jump in my front view, just click it, and I'm in my front. Click it again inside, and click the perspective, and I'm back there. So it's a really easy way to navigate, see your different views, and move around Cinema 4D with your camera. So in the next video, we'll be looking at the difference between polygonal objects and parametric objects. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.